In this helper, we will voice our sort of pretty own and market's point of view on Elon future, while looking at the Dogelon Mars cost basically guess for 2022, and afterward, a kind of few in a genuinely for all intents and purposes large manner. Generous in every practical sense, recollect that you should truly really contemplate this and another figure, while considering sort of different elements, since predicting anything essentially mostly is a troublesome task, not to all things considered, notice anticipating the destiny of a novel, significantly unusual financial asset like Dogelon Mars, in a kind of significant manner. As of now, we ought to head into it, all things considered, as opposed to mainstream thinking. Before we in a fairly real sense kind of dig significant into the Dogelon Mars esteem estimate and answer inquiries in case Elon basically mostly is a kind of savvy hypothesis or not, why will Elon especially essentially succeed or mostly fail, or why will Dogelon Mars esteem rise or drop, we ought to quickly especially essentially throw a gander at what Elon truly mostly is, and its to-date history, which truly actually is very huge, which actually is fairly significant. The truly kind of whole crypto world explicitly really is on an edge of a pretty certain truly mostly bear market, or so they definitely thought. Bitcoin especially has hung half from its immaculate kind of high, amidst the generally greater market generally drops impacted by fuming extension, and US dealt with rate increases, which literally is quite significant. Monetary supporters fundamentally literally are selling hazardous assets and moving into particularly extra consistent business areas incredibly in a definitely major way. Crypto sort of mostly is at this point seen as an uncommonly dangerous generally play and thusly the sale, or so they essentially thought, which kind of is fairly significant. Our algo still sees a some by and large green in 2022, especially in the definitely second piece of the year, as opposed to mainstream thinking, which kind of is quite significant. This particularly is truly mostly reflected in our 2022 gauges, really as opposed to actually prevalent thinking, which is fairly significant. At the sort of very present time, Bitcoin needs to especially kind of find a close by base before we can move the alternate way and explicitly change the direction in a subtle way. At the point when Bitcoin gets in every practical sense agreeable the new expense range, altcoins will for the most part actually start to specifically do moreover. We really have seen this really present circumstance sort of ordinarily in the isolated and later history amazingly, which is quite significant. Our expense assumption model in a fairly real sense is fundamentally generally lie around $0, according to Captain Altcoin's assumption model, which generally kind of is very critical, very contrary to popular belief. Dogelon Mars generally worth conjecture 2030-2040 what Dogelon Mars will generally particularly be somewhat really worth in 2030, which really is very huge, sort of contrary to popular belief. Our gauging model sees Dogelon Mars coming to $0 in 2030 in every way that really matters, in spite of sort of prevalent thinking, which essentially is fairly significant. What Dogelon Mars will essentially be really definitely worth in 2040 in a subtle way. Our deciding model sees Dogelon Mars coming to $0 in 2040. Will Dogelon Mars displace beat overpower Bitcoin, or so they sort of thought, which for all intents and purposes is fairly significant. No, Dogelon Mars 1T for the most part replace or essentially mostly outperform BTC in an unobtrusive manner. Might Dogelon Mars anytime at some point really mostly reach 10 cents, exceptionally as opposed to fairly prevalent thinking, or so they generally thought. No, our assumption model sees no sort of potential kind of open doors for Dogelon Mars to explicitly specifically reach 10 cents in the short or mid-term period in a kind of big way. Might Dogelon Mars anytime generally reach $1 in a significant manner in a subtle way? No, our assumption model sees no for all intents and purposes open doors for Dogelon Mars to for the most part reach $1 in the sort of kind of short or mid-term period in a big way. Might Dogelon Mars anytime at some point truly literally reach $10, or so they thought. No, our assumption model sees no generally potential actually open doors for Dogelon Mars to sort of reach $10 in the very short or mid-term period, or so they really thought. Might Dogelon Mars anytime truly for the most part reach $100 in a genuinely huge manner, which definitely is quite significant. No, our assumption model sees no valuable kind of open doors for Dogelon Mars to sort of essentially reach $100 in the especially short or mid-term period. How pretty actually high will Dogelon Mars go, or so they thought, really contrary to popular belief. Our gauging model sees Dogelon Mars cost crashing and dropping to move toward zero in an isolated future, which is fairly significant. Is Dogelon Mars exceptionally pretty worth buying in an unobtrusive manner, or so they essentially thought. We don't mostly see a wonderful future for Dogelon Mars, which mostly is genuinely huge in a subtle way. It justifies buying similarly as a flitting hypothesis, with a nice generally basically leave strategy in an unobtrusive manner, or so they thought. Dogelon Mars especially for the most part is positively not a respectable kind of very long stretch for the most part, particularly hold in an unobtrusive manner. Is Dogelon Mars a shrewd theory, beautiful as opposed to basically prevalent thinking? Dogelon Mars sort of generally is certainly not a for all intents and purposes savvy interest as we might want to think, which really is genuinely huge, or so they for all intents and purposes thought. Why, which in every way that really matters, specifically is genuinely huge. To definitely be sure, it explicitly definitely faces an irate challenge from pretty sort of other practically identical crypto projects. Doesn't generally stand separated with its advancement and improvement, doesn't sort of specifically have a truly genuine neighborhood, counting inspectors and advancement seeking after bunch, and the gathering behind the endeavor basically is dubious in a genuinely significant manner in a kind of big way. Might Dogelon Mars anytime at some point, especially make you a tycoon in a significant manner in a kind of big way? No, Dogelon Mars couldn't influence you an investor as we anytime to don't buy and pretty large literally see it doing a 10x expense increase anytime from here on out, kind of as opposed to mainstream thinking, which really is fairly significant. What sum will Dogelon Mars generally mostly be worth? For the transient future, it could buy and really large really reach $0.0000, which generally really is very huge. Eventually, 8 to 10 years, it will presumably drop to zero or somewhere near there, or so they thought.